Hello, this is part two of the book thief. We're partway through the book now, and we're up to the chapter called "The Smell of Friendship." We're just going to continue on from here, okay? It continued. Over the next few weeks and into summer, the midnight class began at the end of each nightmare. There were two more bedwetting occurrences, but Hans Huberman merely repeated his previous clean-up heroics and got down to the task of reading. Sketching and reciting in the morning's early hours, quiet voices were loud. On a Thursday, just after 3 p.m., Mama told Lysel to get ready to come with her and deliver some ironing. Papa had other ideas. He walked into the kitchen and said, "Sorry, Mama, she's not going with you today." Mama didn't even bother looking up from the washing bag. "Who asked you, Ashla?" "Come here, Lysel." "She's reading," he said. Papa handed Lysel a steadfast smile and winked. "With me, I'm teaching her. We're going to the Amper, upstream. We're going to practice the accordion." Now he had her attention. Mama placed the washing on the table and worked herself up to the appropriate level of cynicism. "What did you say?" "You heard me, Rose." Mama laughed. "What the hell could you teach her?" A cardboard grin uppercut words. Just like you could read so much, you snarkle. The kitchen waited. Papa counterpunched. "We'll take your ironing for you." "You filthy." She stopped. The words propped in her mouth as she considered it. "Be back before dark." "We can't read in the dark, Mama," Lysel said. "What is that, soulmate?" "Nothing, Mama." I think I might just replace the German words with English ones, because I botched them so badly to the point where they're unrecognizable, so I might as well just say other words. Okay. I'll try and remember the translations and just use those instead. Papa grinned and pointed at the girl. "Book, sandpaper, pencil," he ordered, "and an accordion." Once she was gone, soon they were on Himmel Street, carrying the words, the music, and the washing. As they walked towards Frau Diller's, they turned around a few times to see if Mama was still at the gate. Checking on them, she was. Oh, my fucking Yoda? Checking on them, she was. At one point she called out, "Lysel, hold the ironing straight, don't crease it." "Yes, Mama." A few steps later, "Lysel, are you dressed warm enough?" "What did you say?" "Pig dog, you never hear anything. Are you warm enough? It might get cold later." Around the corner, Papa bent down to do up a shoelace. "Lysel," he asked, "could you roll me a cigarette?" Nothing would give her greater pleasure. Once the ironing was delivered, they made their way up to the Amper River. Hello, we're just doing a reading of the book Thief, and we're partway through. I think this is chapter 7. Yeah, feel free just to sit through and message if you want to interact. Once the ironing was delivered, they made their way back to the Amper River, which flanked the town. It worked its way past the pointing in the direction of Dalch, the concentration camp. There was a wooden planked bridge. They sat maybe 30 meters down from it in the grass, writing the words and reading them aloud. When in darkness was near, Hans pulled the accordion out. Lysel looked at him and listened, though she did not immediately notice the perplexed expression on her papa's face. That evening she played. Papa's face, it travelled and wandered, but it disclosed no answers, not yet. There had been a change in him, a slight shift. She saw it, but didn't realize until later, when everything came together. She didn't see him watching as he played, having no idea that Hans Huberman's accordion was a story. In the times ahead, that story would arrive at 33 Himmel Street in the early hours of the morning, wearing ruffled shoulders and a shivering jacket. It would carry a suitcase, a book, and two questions. A story after story after story within story. For now, there were only the one as far as Lysel was concerned, and she was enjoying it. She settled into the long arms of grass laying back. Her closed eyes and ears held the notes. There were of course some problems as well. A few times Papa nearly yelled at her, "Come on, Lysel," he'd say. "You know this word, you know it." Then just when progress seemed to be flowing well, and somehow some things would get lodged. When the weather was good, they go to the Amber in the afternoon. In the bad weather, it was the basement. This was mainly on the account of Mama. At first they tried the kitchen, but there was no way. "Rosa," Hans said to her at one point quietly, his words cut off one of her sentences. "Could you do me a favor?" She looked up from the stove. "What?" "I'm asking you. I'm begging you. Could you please shut your mouth for 5 minutes?" You can imagine the reaction, and they ended up in the basement. There was no lighting there, so they took a kerosene lamp, and slowly, between school and home, from the river to the basement, from the good days to the bad, Lysel was learning to read and write. "Soon," Papa told her, "you'll be able to read that awful Graves book with your eyes closed. And I can get out of that midget class." In case you don't know, she was put in a younger grade because she couldn't read or write due to a lack of education. She spoke those words with a grim kind of ownership. In one of her basement sessions, Papa dispensed with the sandpaper. It was running out fast, and pulled out a brush. There were no luxuries in the Huberman household, but there was an oversupply of paint, and it became more than useful for Lysel's learning. Papa would say a word, and the bird, and the girl would have to spell it aloud, then paint it on the wall. As long as she got it right, after a month the wall was recoated, a fresh cement page. Some nights, after working in the basement, Lysel would sit on the couch, crouched in the bathroom, and heard. Sorry, I read that very badly. I tried to recover, but it didn't work. Some nights after working in the basement, Lysel would sit crouched in the bath and hear the same utterances from the kitchen. "You stink," Mama would say to Hans, "like cigarettes and kerosene." Sitting in the washer, she imagined the smell of it, mapped out on her papa's clothes. More than anything, it was the smell of friendship, and she could find it on herself. Lysel loved the smell. She would sniff her arm and smile as the water cooled around her. Okay, and that was the end of The Smell of Friendship. It's a quite short chapter, and we'll move on to the next, which is called The Heavyweight Champion of the Schoolyard. The summer of 1939 was in a hurry, or perhaps Lysel was. She spent her time playing football with Rudy and the other kids on Himmel Street, a year-round pastime, taking ironing around town with Mama, and learning words. It felt like it was over a few days after it began. In the latter part of the year, two things happened. From September to November 1939, World War II begins. Lysel Merminger becomes the heavyweight champion of the schoolyard. It was a cool day in Mulching when the war began and my workload increased. The world talked over it. And just a little recap, the narrator of this story is a personification of death. So when he talks about workload, he just means that there's a lot of people dying, which makes sense. Okay. It was a cool day, my workload increased. The world talked it over. Newspaper headlines revealed it. The Führer's voice roared from her German radios. We will not give up. We will not rest. We will be victorious. Our time has come. The German invasion of Poland had begun, and people were gathering everywhere, listening to the news of it. Munich Street, like every other street in Germany, was alive with war. The smell, the voice, the rationing had begun a few days earlier. They were writing on the wall, and now it is official. England and France had made their declaration on Germany. To steal a phrase from Hans Huberman, the fun begins. Sorry. On the day of the announcement, Papa was lucky enough to have some work. On his way home, he picked up a discarded newspaper, and rather than stopping to shovel it between paint tins in his cart, he folded it up and slipped it between his shirt. By the time he had made it home and removed it, his sweat had drawn the ink into his skin. The paper landed on the table, but the news was also stapled onto his chest, a tattoo. Holding his shirt open, he looked down, unsure with the kitchen light. What does it say? Hazel asked. She looked back and forth from the black outlines on his skin to the paper. Hitler takes Poland, he answered, and Hans Superman slumped into a chair. He whispered, and his voice was not remotely patriotic. The face was there again, his accordion face. That was one war started. Lysol would soon be in another. Nearly a month after school resumed, she would move up to her rightful year level. You might think that was due to her improved reading, but it wasn't. Despite the advancement, she still read with great difficulty. Sentences were strewn everywhere. Words fooled her. The reason she was elevated had more to do with the fact that she became disruptive in the younger classes. She answered questions directed to other children and called out a few times. She was given what was known as the watchton, pronounced Warken, in the corridor. The definition of Warken is a good hiding. Ooh, corporal punishment, we love that. She was taken up in a chair at the side and told to keep her mouth shut by the teacher, who also happened to be a nun. At the other end of the classroom, Rudy looked across and waved. Lysel waved back and tried not to smile. At home, she was well into reading the Gravedigger's Handbook with Papa. They would circle the words she didn't understand and take them down to the basement the next day. She thought it was enough. It wasn't enough. Somewhere at the start of November, there was progress tests at school. One of them was for reading. Every child was made to stand in front of the room and read from a passage the teacher gave them. It was a frosty morning, but bright with sun. Children scrunched their eyes. A halo surrounded the Grim Reaper nun. Sister Maria. By the way, I like this human idea of the Grim Reaper. I like the sight. It amuses me. In the sun-heavy classroom, names are rattled off at random. Waldheim, Denham, Steiner. They all stood up and did a reading, all at different levels of credibility. Rudy was surprisingly good. Throughout the test, Lysel sat with a mixture of hot anticipation and excruciating fear. She wanted desperately to measure herself, to find out once and for all how her learning was advancing. Was she up to it? Could she even come close to Rudy and the rest of them? Each time Sister Maria looked at her list, a string of nerves tightened Lysel's ribs. It started in her stomach, but had worked her way up. Soon it would be around her neck, thick as a rope. When Tommy Miller finished his mediocre attempt, she looked around the room. Everyone else had read. She was the only one left. Very good, Sister Maria nodded, pursuing the list. That's everyone. What? No! A voice practically appeared from the other side of the room. attached to a lemon-haired boy whose bony knees knocked under the desk in his pants. He stretched his hand up and said, "Sister Maria, I think you forgot Lysel." Sister Maria was not impressed. She plonked her folder on the table in front of her and inspected. Rudy, with sighing disapproval, was almost melancholic. Sorry. Why, she lamented. Why did she have to put up with Rudy Steiner? Sorry, I really fucked up that paragraph. I'm just gonna recap a little bit. It was almost melancholic. Why, she lamented. Why did she have to put up with Rudy Steiner? She simply couldn't keep up with his mouth. He simply couldn't keep his mouth shut. Why, God, why? No, she said, with finality. Her small belly leaned forward with the rest of her. I'm afraid Lysel cannot do it, Rudy. The teacher looked across for confirmation. She will read for me later. The girl cleared her throat and spoke with quiet defiance. I can do it now, sister. Most of the other kids watched in silence. A few of them performed the beautiful childhood artist snickering. The sister had had enough. No, you cannot. What are you doing? For Lysel was out of her chair, walking slowly and swiftly towards the front of the room. She picked up the book and opened to a random page. All right then, said Sister Maria. You want to do it? Do it. Yes, sister. After a quick glance at Rudy, Lysel lowered her eyes and examined the page. When she looked up again, the room was pulled apart, then squashed back together. All the kids were mashed right before her eyes, and in a moment of brilliance, she imagined herself reading the entire page in faultless fluency-filled triumph. Keyword imagined. Come on, Lysel. Rudy broke the silence. The book thief looked down again at the words. Come on, Rudy mouthed this time. Come on, Lysel. Her blood loudened. The sentences blurred. The white page was suddenly written in another tongue. And it didn't help the tears were forming in her eyes. She couldn't see the words anymore. And the sun, the awful sun, it burst through the window. Glass was everywhere and shone directly into the useless girl. It shouted in her face, you can steal a book, but you can't read one. It came to her, a solution. Breathing. She started to read, but not from the book. In front of her was something from the Gravedigger's Handbook, Chapter 3, In the Event of Snow. She memorized it from Papa's voice. In the event of snow, she spoke. You must make sure you use a good shovel. You must dig deep. You cannot be lazy. You cannot cut corners. Again she sucked in a large clump of air. Of course it is easier to wait for the warmest part of the day. And when it ended, the book was snatched from her grasp and she was told, Lysel, the corridor. As she was given a small watching, or beating, she could hear them all laughing in the classroom. Between Sister Maria striking hard, she saw them, all the mashed children, grinning and laughing, bathed in sunshine, everyone laughing, but Rudy. In the brick she turned to the boy, named Ludwig Schmeckel, came up to her with a book. Hey, Lysel, he asked her, I'm having trouble with this word. Could you read it for me? He laughed, a 10-year-old smugness laughter. You stupid, you idiot. You stupid, you idiot. Sorry, it was the dude saying it, not myself. Clouds filled the night. Big, clumsy, more kids were calling out to her, watching her seethe. Don't listen to them, Rudy advised. It's easy for you to say, you're not the stupid one. Nearing the end of the break, the tally of comments stood at 19. By the 20th, she snapped. It was Schmeckel, back for more. Come on, Lysel. He stuck the book under her nose. Help me out, will you? Lysel helped him out all right. She stood up, took the book from him, and as he smiled over his shoulder at some other kids, she threw it away and kicked him as hard as she could in the vicinity of the groin. Well, as you might imagine, Ludwig's Schmeichel certainly buckled, and on the way down he was punched in the ear. When he landed, he was set upon, and when he was set upon, he was slapped and clawed and obliterated by a girl who was utterly consumed with rage. His skin was so warm and soft, her knuckles and fingernails were so frighteningly tough despite her smallness. "You pig!" Her voice, too, was able to scratch him. "You asshole! Can you spell asshole for me?" Oh, how the clouds stumbled and assembled in the sky, great obese clouds, dark and plump, bumping into each other, apologizing, moving, and finding room. Reading in 2023? Look, someone has to do it. I mean, it'd be that way. It'd be that way. Anyway, where was I? Okay. Children were there, quick as well, quick as kids gravitated towards a fight. A stew of arms and legs and shouts and cheers grew thicker around them. They were watching Lysel Merminger give Ludwig Skirkmo the hiding of his lifetime. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," a girl commented with a shriek. "She's going to kill him." Lysel did not kill him, but she came close. In fact, probably the only thing that stopped her was the twitchingly pathetic, grinning face of Tommy Miller, still crowded with adrenaline. Lysel caught sight of him smiling with such absurdity that she had dragged him down and started beating him up as well. "What are you doing?" he wailed. Only then, after the third or fourth slap, a trickle of bright blood from his nose fell to the floor. She stopped. On her knees, she sucked in the air and listened to the groans beneath her. She watched the whirlpool of faces left and right. She announced, "I'm not stupid." No one argued. It was only when everyone moved back inside that Sister Maria saw the state of Ludwig that the fight resumed. First it was Rudy, then a few others who bore the brunt of suspicion. They were always at each other. "Hands," each boy was ordered, but every pair was clean. "I don't believe this," Sister Maria muttered. "It can't be." Because sure enough, when Lysel stepped forward and presented her hands, Ludwig was all over them, rusting by the moment. "The corridor," she stated for a second time that day. For the second time that hour, actually. This time it was not small. It was a large beating. It was not an average one. This time it was the mother of all corridor beatings, one sting of the stick after the other, so that Lysel would barely be able to sit down for a week. There was no laughter from the classroom, more the silent fear of listening in. Sorry, give me a second. Okay. Where was I? At the end of the school day, Lysel walked home with Rudy and the other Steiner children, nearing Hamel Street in a hurry. Of thoughts of culmination, of misery swept over her. The failed recital of the Gravedigger's Handbook, the demolition of her family, her nightmare, the humiliation of the day. She crouched in the gutter and wept. It all led to this. Rudy stood next to her, looking down. It began to rain, nice and hard. Kurt Steiner came out, but neither of them moved. One sat painfully now amongst the falling chunks of rain, and the other stood next to her. "Why did he have to die?" she asked. But still Rudy did nothing, said nothing. When finally she finished and stood herself up, he put his arm around her, best buddy-like style, and they walked on. There was no request for a kiss, nothing like that. You can love Rudy for that, if you'd like. Just don't kick me in the eggs. That was what he was thinking. But he didn't tell Lysel that. It was for nearly 4 years later that he offered that information. For now, Rudy and Lysel made their way onto Himmel Street in the rain. He was the crazy one who had painted himself black and defeated the world. She was the book thief without the words. Trust me, the words were on their way, and when they arrived, Lysel would hold them in her hands like the clouds, and she would wring them out like the rain. And that's the end of part 1. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to part 2, which is called The Shoulder Shrug. The first chapter is called A Girl Made of Darkness. Some statistical information. The first book that Lighthouse stole was January 3rd, 1939. The second book stolen was April 20th, 1940. The duration between books stolen was 463 days, so a little over a year. If you were being flippant about it, you'd say that it took a little bit of fire, really, and some human shouting to go with it. You'd say that was all Lysel Merminger needed to apprehend her second stolen book, even if it smoked in her hands, even if it lit her ribs. A problem, however, is this. There was no time to be flippant. There was no time to be half-watching, turning around, or checking the stove, because the book thief herself stole the second book. Not only were there many factors involved in her hunger to do so, but the act of stealing it triggered the crux of what was to come. It would provide her with a venue of continued book thievery. It would inspire Hans Huberman to come up with a plan to help the Jewish fist fighter. And it would show me, once again, that one opportunity leads to another, just as risk leads to more risk, life to more life, and death to more death. In a way, it was destiny. People may tell you that Nazi Germany was built on anti-Semitism, a somewhat overzealous leader, and a nation of hate-fed bigots. But it would have all come down to nothing had the Germans not loved one particular activity: to burn. The Germans loved to burn things: shops, synagogues, rechtegs, houses, personal items, slain people, and of course books. They enjoyed a good book burning, all right, which gave people who were partial to books the opportunity to get their hands on certain publications they otherwise wouldn't have had. One person who was that way inclined was, as we know, a thin-boned girl named Lysel Merminger. She may have waited 463 days, but it was worth it. At the end of an afternoon which stood and contained much excitement, much beautiful evil, one blood-soaked ankle, and a slap from a trusted hand, Lysel Merminger attained her second success story, The Shoulder Shrug. It was a blue book with red engraved writing on the cover. There was a small picture of a cuckoo bird under the title, also red. She looked back. Lysel was not ashamed to have stolen it. On the contrary, it was the pride that more resembled that small pool of feeling something in her stomach. And it was anger, dark hatred that fueled her desire to steal. In fact, on April 20th, the Fuhrer's birthday, when she snatched the book from beneath a steaming heap of ashes, Lysel was a girl made of darkness. The question, of course, should be why? What was there to be so angry about? What had happened in the past 4 or 5 months to accumulate such a feeling? In short, the answer traveled from Himmel Street to the Fuhrer, to the unfindable location of a real mother and back again. Like most misery, it started with apparent happiness. That's the end of the first chapter. Moving on to the second, which is called The Joy of Cigarettes. Toward the end of 1939, Lysel had settled into her life in Mulching pretty well. She still had nightmares about her brother and missed her mother, but there were comforts now. Two, she loved Papa, Hans Huberman, and even their foster mother, despite the bucketings, asperges, and verbal assaults She loved and hated her best friend, Rudy Steiner, which was perfectly normal, and she loved the fact that despite her failure in the classroom, her reading and writing was definitely improving and would soon be on the verge of something respectable. All of this resulted in at least some form of contentment, and would soon be built upon to approach the concept of being happy. Okay, the keys of happiness. Finishing the Gravedigger's Handbook, escaping the ire of Sister Maria, receiving 2 books for Christmas. December 17th. She remembered the date well. It was exactly a week before Christmas. As usual, her nightly nightmare interrupted her sleep, and she was woken by Hans Hofmann. His hands held the sweaty fabric of her pajama top. "The train?" he whispered. I still confirmed, "The train." She gulped the air in until she was ready, and then began reading the 11th chapter of the Gravedigger's Handbook. Just past 3 o'clock they finished it, and on the final chapter, respecting the graveyard, remained Papa, his silver eyes swollen in their tiredness, his face awash with whiskers, shut the book and accepted the leftovers of his sleep. He didn't get them. The light was out for barely a minute when Lysel spoke to him across the dark. "Papa?" He only made a noise somewhere in his throat. "Are you awake, Papa?" "Yeah." Up on the elbow. "Can we finish the book, please?" There was a long breath and the scratchery of hands on whiskers. In the light, he opened the book and began. Chapter 12. Respecting the Graveyard. They read through the early hours of the morning, circling and writing the words she did not comprehend, and turning pages towards daylight. A few times Papa nearly slept and succumbed to the itchy fatigue in his eyes and the wilting of his head. Lysel caught out on each occasion. She still had neither the selflessness to allow him to sleep, nor the hide to offend. She was a girl, and with a mountain to climb. Eventually, as the darkness outside began to break up a little, they finished. The last passage looked like this. "We at the Banyan Cemetery Association hope that we have informed and entertained you in the workings, safety measurements, and duties of grave digging. We wish you every success with your career in the funerary arts, and hope this book was helpful in some way." When the book closed, they shared a sideways glance. Papa spoke. "You made it, huh?" Lysel, half wrapped in blankets, studied the black book in her hand, the silver lettering. She nodded, dry-mouthed in tiredness, dry-mouthed and early morning hungry. It was one of those perfect tirednesses of having not only conquered the hard work at hand, but the night who had blocked the way. Papa stretched with fists closed, and his eyes grinded shut. It was a morning that they didn't dare to be rainy. They each stood, walked into the kitchen, through the fog frost of the window. They were able to see the pink bars of light on the snowy banks of Hamel Street's rooftops. "Look at the colors," Papa said. "It's not hard for a man who not only notices the colors but speaks them." Lysel held the book. She gripped it tighter as the snow turned orange. On the footsteps, she could see a small boy sitting up the sky. "His name was Werner," she said. The words trotted out involuntarily. Papa said, "Yes, yes it was." At school during the time, there had been no more reading tests, but Lysel slowly gathered confidence. She did pick up a stray textbook before class one morning to see if she could read it without trouble. She could read every word, but she remained stranded at a much slower pace than that of her classmates. It's a lot easier to realize to be on the verge of something than to actually be it. This would still take time. One afternoon, she was tempted to steal the book from the classroom bookshelf, but frankly, the prospect of another corridor beating on her hands of Sister Maria was a powerful enough deterrent. On top of that, there was actually no real desire for her to take the book from the classroom. It was most likely the intensity of the November failure that caused this lack of interest. But Lysel wasn't sure. She knew that it was there. In class, she did not speak. She didn't so much as look the wrong way. As winter set in, she was no longer a victim of Sister Maria's frustrations, preferring to watch as others were marched out into the corridor and given their just rewards. The sound of another student struggling in the hallway was not particularly enjoyable, but the fact that it was someone else was, if not a true comfort, a relief. When the school broke up briefly for lunch, Lysel even afforded Sister Maria a Merry Christmas before going on her way, knowing that the Hubermans were essentially broke until paying off debts and paying rent quicker. Still paying off debts and paying debts quicker than the money could come in. She was not expecting a gift of any sort, perhaps only some better food. To her surprise, on Christmas Eve, after sitting in church at midnight with Mama, Papa, Hans Jr., and Trudy, she came home to find something wrapped in newspaper into the Christmas tree. From St. Nicholas, Papa said, but the girl was not fooled. She hugged both her foster parents, with the snow still laid across her shoulders. Unfurling the paper, she unwrapped two small books. The first one, The Force Dog, was written by a man named Matthew Olberg. All up, she read that book 13 times. On Christmas Eve, she would read the first 20 pages at the kitchen table while Papa and Hans Jr. argued about a thing she did not understand, something called politics. Later, they read some more in bed, adhering to the tradition of cycling, the words she did not know and kept writing them down. Force the Dog also had pictures, lovely curves in the ears of caricatures of a German shepherd with an obscene drooling problem and the ability to talk. The second book was called The Lighthouse. It was written by a woman, Ingrid Rippenstein. That particular book was a little longer, so Lysel was only able to get through it 9 times, her pace increasing ever so slightly by the end of such prolific readings. It was a few days after Christmas that she asked Papa a question regarding the books. They were all eating in the kitchen, looking at the spoonfuls of pea soup entering Mama's mouth. She decided to shift her focus to Papa. There was something I needed to ask you. At first it was nothing. And? It was Mama, her mouth still half full. I just wanted to know how you found the money to buy these books. A short grin smiled onto Papa's spoon. You really want to know? Of course. From his pocket, Papa took what was left of his tobacco ration and began rolling a cigarette. At which Lysel became impatient. Are you going to tell me or not? Papa laughed. I am telling you, child. He completed the production of one cigarette, put it onto the table, and began another. Like this. That was when Mama finished his soup with a clank, suppressed a burp, and answered for him. That pig, she said. You know what he did? He rolled up all of his filthy cigarettes, went to the market in his town, and traded them with some guy. Sorry, it's a slur. I'd rather not read the G slur. Anyway, moving on. 8 cigarettes per book. Papa shoved one into his mouth with triumph. He lit up and took in the smoke. Praise the Lord for the cigarettes, huh, Mama? Mama only handed him one of her trademark looks of disgust, followed by the most common ration of her vocabulary: pig. Lysel swapped a link with her father, and finished eating her soup. As always, one of her books was next to her. She could not deny that the answer to her question had been more than satisfactory. There were not many people who could say that their education had been paid for with cigarettes. Mama, on the other hand, said that if Aunt Superman was good at all, he would trade some tobacco for the new dress she was desperate in need of, or some better shoes. But no, she emptied the words into the sink. When it comes to me, you'd rather smoke a whole ration, wouldn't you? Plus some of next door's. A few nights later, however, Hans Superman came home with a box of eggs. Sorry, Mama. He placed them on the table. They were all out of shoes. Mama didn't complain. She even sang to herself while she cooked those eggs. To the brink of burndom, and appeared that there was great joy with cigarettes, was a happy time in the Huberman household, which ended a few weeks later. The rot started with the washing, and it rapidly increased. When Lysel accompanied Rosa Huberman on her deliveries across Mulching, one of her customers, Ernst Vogel, informed that he could no longer afford to have his washing and ironing done. The times, he excused himself. What can I say? They're getting harder. The war's making things tight. He looked at the girl. I'm sure you can get an allowance for keeping the little one, don't you? To Lysel's dismay, Mama was speechless. Empty bag was at her side. Come on, Lysel. It was not said. It was pulled along, rough-handed. Vogel called out from his front step. He was perhaps 5'9", and his greasy scraps of hair fell lifelessly across his forehead. I'm sorry, Frau Huberman. Lysel waved at him. He waved back. Mama cascaded. Don't wave at that asshole, she said. Now hurry up. That night, when Lysel had a bath, Mama scrubbed her especially hard, muttering the whole time about Vogel's Sockel, and imitating him at 2-minute intervals. You must get an allowance for the girl, she berated Lysel's naked chest as she scrubbed away. You're not worth that much. You're not worth that much, you little shit. You're not making me rich, you know. Lysel sat there and took it. Not more than a week after that particular incident, Rosa hauled her into the kitchen. Right, Lysel, she said. She sat her down at the table. Since you spent half your time on the street playing football, you can make yourself useful out there for a change. Lysel watched only on her hands. Lysel watched her own hands. What is it, Mama? From now on, you're going to pick up and deliver washing for me. Those rich people are less likely to fire us if you're the one standing in front of them. If they ask you where I am, tell them I'm sick, and look sad when you tell them you're skinny and pale, enough to get their pity. Well, her agitation was obvious. The others might, so don't argue. Yes, Mama. For a moment it appeared that her foster mother would comfort her or pat her on the shoulder. She did no such thing. Instead, Rosa Huberman stood up and selected a wooden spoon and held it under Lysel's nose. It was a necessity as far as she was concerned. When you're out on the street, you take the bag to each place and you bring it straight home with the money. Even if there's next to nothing, no going to Papa. If he's actually working for once, no mucking around with that little pig, I think it's pig, little pig Rooney cider. Straight home. Yes, Mama. And when you hold that bag, hold it properly. Don't swing it, drop it, crease it, or throw it over your shoulder. Yes, Mama. Yes, Mama. Rosa Huberman was a great intimidator and a fervent one. You'd better not, you little bitch. I'll find out if you do. And you know what? You know that, don't you? Yes, Mama. Saying those two words was often the best way to survive, as doing what she told her to do. And from there, Lysol walked the streets of Mulching, from the poor end to the rich, picking up and delivering the washing. At first it was a solitary job, which she never complained about. After all, the first time she took the sack through town, she turned a corner onto Munich Street, looked both ways, and gave it one enormous swing, a whole revolution, and checked the contents inside. Thankfully there were no creases, no wrinkles, just a smile, and a promise never to swing again. Overall, Lysol enjoyed it. There was no share of the pay, but she was out of the house and walking the streets without Mama. It was heaven itself. No finger pointing or cursing, no one staring at them as she was sworn at for holding the bag wrong. Nothing but sincerity. She came to like the people too. The Pfefferhofers expected the clothes, saying, yeah, get on with it. I still imagined that they did everything twice. Gentle Helena Schmidt, handing the money over with an arthritic curl of the hand. The Weingaters, whose bent-whiskered cat was always called to the door with them. Little Gorlips was what it called him, after Hitler's right-hand man. Okay. Sometimes, and Frau Hermann, the mayor's wife, standing fluffy-haired and silvery with her enormous cold-dead doorway. Always silent, always alone, no words, not once. Sometimes Rudy came along. How much money do you have there? He asked up one afternoon. It was nearly dark, and they were walking to Himmel Street, past the shop. You've heard about Frau Dillner, haven't you? She says that she's got lollies hidden somewhere, and for the right price. Don't even think about it. Lysol, as always, was gripping the money hard. It's not so bad for you. You don't have to face my mama. Rudy shrugged. It was worth a try. In the middle of January, schoolwork turned its attention to letter writing. After learning the basics, each student was to write 2 letters, one to a friend and one to somebody from another class. Lysol's letter from Rudy went like this. Dear little bitch, are you still useless at football as you were the last time I played? I hope so. That means I could run past you just like Jesse Owens at the Olympics. When Sister Maria found it, she asked a question very amiably. Sister Maria's offer. Do you feel like visiting the corridor, Mr. Steiner? Needless to say, Rudy answered with the negative, and the paper was torn up. And he started again, this time written to someone named Lysol, and inquired as to what her hobbies might be. At home, while completing a letter for homework, Lysol decided that writing to Rudy or some other sort girl was actually ridiculous, and it meant nothing. As she wrote in the basement, she spoke to Papa, who was repainting the wall again. Both he and the paint fumes turned around. Was this? Now this was the roughest form of German a person could speak, but it was spoken with an air of absolute pleasantness. Yeah, what? Would I be able to write a letter to Mama? A pause. Why would you like to write? What do you want to write a letter to her for? You have to put up with her every day. Papa was scrutinizing, a sly smile. It wasn't bad enough? No, not that, Mama, she swallowed. Oh, Papa returned to the wall and continued pacing. Well, I guess so. You could send one to what's her name? The one who brought you here a few times from the foster people? Frau Heinrich. That's right. Send it to her. Maybe she can send it to your mother. Even at the time, he sounded unconvincing, as if he wasn't telling Lysel something. The word of her mother had also been light-tipped on Frau Heinrich's brief visits. Instead of asking him what was wrong, Lysel began writing immediately, choosing to ignore the sense of foreboding that was quick to accumulate inside her. It took 3 hours and 6 drafts to complete the perfect letter, telling her mother all about mulching, her papa and his accordion, the strange but true ways of Rudy Steiner, the exploits of Rosa Huberman. She also explained how proud she was, that she could now read and write a little. The next day she posted it at Frau Diller's with a stamp from the kitchen drawer, and she began to wait. The night she wrote the letter, she overheard a conversation between Hans and Rosa. What's she doing writing a letter to her mother? Mama said, her voice surprisingly calm and caring. As you can imagine, this worried the girl a great deal. She would have preferred them arguing, whispering adults hardly inspired confidence. She asked me, Papa said, and I couldn't say no. How could I? Jesus, Mary, Jo said. She's just forget her. Who knows where she is? Who knows what they've done to her? In bed, Lysel hugged herself tight. She pulled herself up. The thought of her mother and repeated Rosa Hubbin's words. Where was she? What had they done to her? And once and for all, who, in fact, were they? Flash forward. Oh, sorry. Next chapter is called Dead Letters. I'm just going to take a drink. Okay, on with the next chapter. Flash forward to the basement, September 1943. A 14-year-old girl was writing into a small, dark-covered book. She was bony but strong, and has seen many things. Papa sits with the accordion at his feet. He says, You know, Lysel, I nearly wrote you a reply and signed your mother's name. He scratched his leg, where the plaster used to be. But I couldn't bring myself. Several times through the remainder of January and the entirety of February, when Lysel searched the letterbox for replies to a letter, it clearly broke her foster father's heart. I'm sorry, he would tell her. Not today, huh? In hindsight, she saw the whole exercise had been pointless, that her mother had been in a position to do so. That had her mother been in a position to do so, she would have already made contact with the foster care people, or directly with the girl, or the Hoovermans, where there had been nothing. To lead insult to injury, in mid-February, Lysel was given a letter from another ironing customer, the Fasselhoovers, in Peter Street. The pair of them stood with great tallness in the hallway, giving her a melancholic regard. For your mama, the man said, handing the envelope. Tell her we're sorry. Tell her we're sorry. It was not a good night in the Hooperman residence. Even when Lysel returned, retreating to the basement to write her 5th letter to her mother, but one of them yet to be sent. She could hear Rosa swearing and carrying on about those Fasselhoover Arschloches and the lousy Ernest Vogel. Wir waren so zerbröseln für einen Monat. She heard her call. I should all piss fire for a month. It should all piss fire for a month, Lysel wrote. When her birthday came around, there was no gift. There was no gift because there was no money, and at that time Papa was out of tobacco. I told you, Mama pointed a finger at him. I told you not to get you those books for Christmas, but no, did you listen? Of course not. I know. He turned quietly to the girl. I'm sorry, Lysel, we just can't afford it. Lysel didn't mind. She didn't whinge or moan or stamp her feet. She simply swallowed the disappointment and decided on one calculated risk. A present from herself. She would gather all the accurate letters to her mother and stuff them into one envelope. She would use just a tiny portion of the washing and ironing money to mail it. And of course, she would take the beating, most likely in the kitchen, and she would not make a sound. 3 days later, the plan came to fruition. Some of it's missing. Mama counted the money a fourth time and Lysel over the stove. It was warm there, and it cooked the food fast. It was warm there, and it cooked the fast flow of her blood. What happened, Lysel? She lied. They must have given me less than usual. Did you count it? I spent it, Mama. Rosa came closer. This was not a good sign. She was very close to the wooden spoons. You what? Before she could answer, the wooden spoon came down on Lysel, numbing his body, like the gate of God. Red marks, like footprints, and they had burned from the floor. When it was over, the girl actually looked up and explained. There was a pulse and yellow light. Altogether, her eyes blinked. I mailed my letters. That came down to her with the dustiness of the floor, feeling her clothes. There were more next to her than on her, and the sudden realization that this would be all for nothing, that her mother would never write back, that she would never see her again. The reality of this gave her a second beating. It stung her. It did not stop for many minutes. Above all, Rosa appeared to be smidged, but as she soon clarified, as her covered face loomed closer, dejected, she stood there in all her plumpness, holding the wooden spoon at her side like a club. She reached down and leaked a little. I'm sorry, Lysel. Lysel knew her well enough to understand that this was not for the hiding. The red marks grew larger and patched her skin. She lay there in the dust and the dirt and the dim light, her breathing calmed, and a stray yellow tear trickled down her face. She could feel herself against the floor, a forearm, a knee, elbow, a cheek, a calf muscle. The floor was cold, especially against her cheek, but she was unable to move. She would never see her mother again. For nearly an hour she remained spread out under the kitchen table until Papa came and played the accordion. Only then did she sit up and recover. When she wrote about that night, she held no animosity towards Rosa Huberman at all, or to her mother for that matter. To her they were only victims of circumstance. The only thought that continually reoccurred was the yellow tear had been dark. She realized the tear would have been black. But it was dark, she told herself. No matter how many times she tried to imagine that scene with the light, she knew that there had been no struggle to visualize it. She was beaten in the dark, and it remained there on the dark, cold kitchen floor. Even Papa's music was in the color of darkness. Even Papa's music. The strange thing was that she was vaguely comforted by the thought that it, rather than distressed by it. The dark, the light, what was the difference? Nightmares had reinforced themselves in each other as the book began to truly understand how many things there were and how they would always be. If nothing else, she could prepare herself. Perhaps on the Führer's birthday, when the answer to the question of her mother's suffering showed itself completely, she was able to react, despite her perplexity and rage. I saw Miminger was ready. Happy birthday, Herr Führer. Many happy returns. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Next was called Hitler's Birthday, 1940. Again, all hopelessness. I still checked the letterbox each afternoon throughout March and well into April. This was despite a Hans requested visit from Frau Heinrich, who explained to the Hubermans that the foster care office had lost contact completely with Paula Merminger. Still, the girl persisted, and as you might expect, each day when she searched the mail, there was nothing. Walching, like the rest of Germany, was in the grip of preparing for Hitler's birthday. This particular year, with development of the war, Hitler's current victorious position, the Nazis' partisans in Walching wanted the celebration to be specifically befitting. There would be a parade, marching, music, singing. There would be fire, while Lysel walked the streets of Walching, picking up and delivering and washing and ironing. Nazi Party members were accumulating fuel. A couple of times Lysel was a witness to men and women knocking on doors asking if they had any material that they feel they should be done away with or destroyed. Papa's copy of the Molching Express announced that there would be a celebratory fire in the town square, which would be attended by all local Hitler Youth divisions. It would commemorate not only the Führer's birthday, but the victory over all his enemies, and over the restraints that had held Germany back since the First World War. Any materials, it requested. For such times, newspapers, posters, books, flags, and any other propaganda of our enemies should be brought to the Nazi Party office on Munich Street. Even Schiller Street, the road of yellow stars, which was awaiting its renovation, was ransacked one last time to find something, anything to burn in the name of the Führer's glory. The party had gone and published 1,000 books or so, posters of poisonous moral matter, simply to incinerate them. Everything was in its place to make April 20th magnificent. It would be a day full of burning and cheering and book thievery. In the Huberman household that morning, all was now typical. That pig was looking out the window. Cursed Rhoda Huberman. Every day, she went on. What are you looking at this time? Oh, my papa was polite. The flag cloaked his back from the top of the window. You should have a look at this woman, I can see. He glanced over his shoulder and grinned at Lysel. You might as well run after her. She leaves you for dead, Mama. Schwein! She took the wooden spoon at him. Papa continued looking out the window at an imaginary woman in a very real corridor of German flags. On the streets of Molching that day, each window was decorated for the Führer. In some places, like Frau Diller's, the glass was vigorously washed and the flag pristine, and the swastika looked like a jewel on a red and white blanket. In others, the flag trundled from the ledge, like washing hung out to dry, but it was still there. Earlier there had been a minor calamity. The Hubermans couldn't find their flag. They'll come for us, my lord and husband. They'll take us away. We have to find it. At one point it seemed like Papa might have to go down to the basement and paint a flag on one of his drop sheets. Thankfully, it turned up buried behind the accordion in the cupboard. The infernal accordion was blocking my view. Mama swiveled. Myself. The girl had the honor of pinning the flag to the window frame. Later on, Hans Jr. and Trudy came for the afternoon eating like they did on Christmas or Easter. Now it seems like a good time to introduce them a little more comprehensively. Trudy, or Trudel, as she was often known, was only a few inches taller than Mama. She had cloned Rosa Huberman. Unfortunate waddlesome walking style. but the rest of her was much milder. Being a live-in housemaid in a wealthy part of Munich, she was most likely bored of children, but she was always capable of at least a few smiles and words to Lysel's direction. She had soft lips, a quiet voice. Hans Jr. had the eyes of his father, and the height. The silver eyes, however, wasn't warm like Papa's. They had been furrowed. There was more flesh on his bones too, and he had blonde prickled hair, and skin like off-white paint. They came close together on the train from Munich, and it didn't take long for old tensions to rise up. A story of history of Hans Huberman versus his son. In the opinion of Hans Jr., his father was every part of an old, decrepit Germany, one that allowed everyone to take it for the proverbial ride while its own people suffered. Growing up, he was aware that his father had been called Der Judenmaler, the Jew painter, painting for Jewish houses. And then came an incident that I'd fully present to you soon enough. The day Hans blew it, on the verge of joining the party. Everyone knew you weren't supposed to paint over slurs written on the Jewish shop front. Such behavior was bad for Germany. It was bad for the transgressor. So have they let you in yet? Hans Jr. picked up where they left off at last Christmas. Then what? Take a guess. The party. No, I think they've forgotten about me. Well, have you ever tried again? You can't just sit around waiting for the new world to take it with you. You have to go out and be a part of it, despite your past mistakes. Papa looked up. Mistakes? I've made many mistakes in my life, but not joining the Nazi Party isn't one of them. They still have my application, you know that. But I couldn't go back to ask. It was a great shiver that waltzed through the window with the draught. Perhaps it was the breeze of the third range, gathering in even greater strength, or maybe it was just Europe again, breathing. Either way, it fell across them, as their metallic eyes clashed like tin cans in the kitchen. You never cared about this country, said Hans Superman. Not enough, anyway. Papa's eyes started corroding. It did not stop. Hans Jr. For some reason, he looked at the girl, with her 3 books standing upright on the table, as if in the conversation. Lysel was silently mouthing the words as she read from one of them. And what trash is this girl reading? She should be reading Mein Kampf. Lysel looked up. Don't worry, Lysel, Papa said. Just keep reading. He doesn't know what he's saying. But Hans Jr. wasn't finished. He stepped closer and said, either you're for the Fuhrer or against him, and I can see that you're against him. You always have been. Lysel watched Hans Jr.'s face, fixed on the thinnest of his lips and the rocky line of his bottom teeth. It's pathetic. How a man can stand by and do nothing as a whole nation cleans out the garbage and makes itself great. Trudy and Mama sat silently, scared as Lysel did. There was a smell of pea soup and something burning. The confrontation. They were all waiting for the next words. They came from the son, just 2 of them. You coward. He upturned into Papa's face. He promptly left the kitchen and the house. Ignoring futility, Papa walked to the doorway and called out to his son, Coward? I'm the coward? Then rushed to the gate and pleadingly after him. Mama hurried to the window, ripped away the flag, and opened it. She, Trudy, and Lysel crowded together, watching her father catch up to his son and grab hold of him, begging him to stop. They could hear nothing, but the manner in which Hans Jr. shrugged loose was loud enough. The sight of Papa watching him walk away roared at them from up in the street. Hansi! Mama finally cried out, but Trudy and Lysel flinched from her voice. Come back! The boy was gone. Yes, the boy was gone. And I wish I could tell you that everything worked out for the younger Hans Umben, but it didn't. When he vanished from Himmel Street that day, in the name of the Fuhrer, who had hurtled through the events of another story, each step leading tragically to Russia, to Stalingrad. Some facts about Stalingrad. In 1942 and early 43, in that city the sky was bleached bedsheet white each morning. All day, as they carried the souls across it, that sheet was splashed with blood until it was filled and bulging to the earth. In the evening it would be wrung out and bleached, again ready for the next dawn, and that when fighting was only during the day. With the sun gone, Hans Huberman stood for a few moments longer. The street looked so big, and when he reappeared inside, Mama fixed her gaze on him, but no words were exchanged. She didn't admonish him at all, which, as you know, is highly unusual. Perhaps she decided he was injured enough, having been labelled a coward by his only son. For a while he remained silent at the table after eating was finished. Was he really a coward, as his son had so brutally pointed out? Certainly in the First World War he considered himself one. He attributed his survival to it. But then there was cowardice in the acknowledgement of fear. Is there cowardice in being glad that you lived? His thoughts crisscrossed at the table. He stared into it. Papa? Nigel asked, but he did not look at her. What was he talking about? What did he mean when nothing? Papa answered. He spoke quiet and calm to the table. Nothing. Forget about him, Nigel. It took perhaps a minute for him to speak again. Shouldn't you be getting ready? He looked at the time. Don't you have a bonfire to go to? Yes, Papa. The book thief went and changed into a Hitler Youth uniform, and half an hour later they walked to the BDM headquarters. From there the children would be taken to the town square in their groups. Speeches would be made, a fire would be lit, a book would be stolen. Okay, so that was the end of that chapter. I think I'll take a little break, just because I've been reading for a while and my throat is getting very sore. Okay. Chapter is that? That was scary. The notification gave me a fright. I should really turn down the volume on this thing. That's fucking scary. And I'd be terrible at horror games. Everything fucking frightens me. 3, 4. Okay, there's part 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, there's no chapter in between? Yeah, 7, 8. 9, 10, 11. 11! Nice. So we've read about 7 chapters, or so we've just finished chapter 11. I made a decent chunk through the book. Made it about this far. So I guess we've read about a little under a quarter of it so far. It's going to take ages to finish. But that's okay. We can take our time. I should really buy more lozenges. Maybe that would help. Maybe I should have considered reading a book which has less German in it. I swear I botch it so badly every single time I read a sentence. It just so many letters which are pronounced differently from how I'm used to. And whenever I bring it up to my friend who actually speaks German, I try to say some of the words and they're like, "What the hell are you saying? You sound so stupid." I try my best, but sometimes your best isn't quite enough. Oh well. Yeah, sorry if I'm giving you a bit of ear rape. My microphone is in my headset. Yeah, it is on that side. Okay. Yeah, I wonder if the sound quality is any good. I tried to test it earlier on, but it wasn't working very well, so I had to do like some external checks. It seemed fine, but I think it's a little bit better than my computer, which has a lot of reverb in it. But you do what you do. Okay. Shall I continue? Actually, reading this book like partway through, I'm realizing things which I didn't see like the first time I've read this book. Because reading it aloud makes you have to analyze every word that you're saying, and so it helps you to understand the story better. Especially since I have a tendency to kind of skip sentences and lines accidentally. I don't know why I do that. I just skip them, or I speed read without realizing it, and I don't take in any of the information, and it isn't working properly. Okay, my throat isn't getting any better, so I think I'll read one more chapter, and then I'll end the story there. Okay. The next chapter is called 100% German Sweat. People line the streets as youth of Germany march towards the town hall and the square. On quite a few occasions, Lysel forgot about her mother and any other problem which she currently held ownership. There was a swell in her chest as people clapped them on. Some kids waved to their parents, but only briefly. It was an explicit instruction that they march straight and did not look or wave to the crowd. When Rudy's group came to the square and was instructed to halt, there was a discrepancy. Tommy Miller. The rest of the regiment stopped marching, and Tommy plowed directly into the boy in front of him. Ow! The boy spat before turning around. I'm sorry, said Tommy, arms still apologetically out. His face tripped over itself. I couldn't hear it. There was a small moment, but it was also a preview of troubles to come for Tommy, for Rudy. At the end of the marching, the Hitler Youth divisions were allowed to disperse, but it would have been near impossible to keep them all together as the bonfire burned in their eyes and excited them. Together they cried, one united Hail Hitler, we're free to wander. Lysel looked for Rudy, but once the crowd of children scattered, she was caught amongst a mess of uniforms and high-pitched words, kids calling out to other kids. By 43, the air had cooled. By 4:30, sorry, I read that backwards. No. By 4:30, the air had cooled considerably. People joked that they needed warming up. That's all this rubbish is good for anyway. Trolleys were used to wheel it all in. It was dumped into the middle of the town square and doused with something sweet. Books and paper and other materials would slide or tumble down, only to be thrown onto the pile. From further away it looked like something volcanic, or something grotesque and alien that had somehow landed miraculously in the middle of town and needed to be snuffed out fast. The applied smell leaned towards the crowd, who kept a good distance. There were well in use of 1,000 people on the ground, on the town hall steps, on the rooftops that surrounded the square. When Lysel tried to make her way through, a crackling sound prompted her to think that the fire had already begun. It hadn't. The noise was the kinetic cube, flowing and charging up. They started without me, although something inside her told her that it was a crime after all. Her 3 books, the most precious items she owned, she compelled to see the thing, but she couldn't help it. I guess humans like to watch a little destruction. Sandcastles, houses of cards, that's where they begin. Their great skill is their capacity to escalate. The thought of missing it was erased, and she found a gap in the bodies and was able to see a mound of guilt still intact. It was prodded and splashed, even spat on. It reminded her of an unpopular child, forlorn and bewildered, powerless to alter its fate. No one liked it. Head down, hands in pockets, forever amen. Bits and pieces continued falling on its sides as Lysel hunted for Rudy. Where is that pig? She stood up. The sky was crouching. A horizon of Nazi flags and uniforms rose upwards, crippling her view every time she attempted to get over a smaller child's head. It was pointless. The crowd was itself. There was no swaying it, squeezing through it, or reasoning with it. You breathed it in, you sang its songs, you were the fire. Silence was requested by a man on a podium. His uniform was shiny brown, and the iron was still practically on it. The silence began. His first words, Heil Hitler. His first action, the salute to the Führer. Today is a beautiful day, he continued. Not only is it our great leader's birthday, but we also stop our enemies once again. We stop them from reaching into our minds. He put an end to the disease which has spread throughout Germany for the last 20 years, if not more. He was performing now what was called a Schreierei, a consummate exhibition of passionate shouting, warning the crowd to be watchful, to be vigilant, to seek out and destroy the evil machinations plotting to infect the motherland with its deplorable ways. The immoral, the communists, The word again, the old word, the dark word, rooms, suited wearing men, the Jews. Halfway through the speech, sorry, halfway through the speech, Lysel surrendered as the word communist seized her. The remainder of the Nazi recital swept by, either tired or lost somewhere in the German feet around her. Waterfalls of words. A lost girl wading water, she thought it again. Communist. Up until now, the BDM had been told that Germany was the superior race, but no one in particular had been mentioned. Of course, everyone knew that the Jews, as they were the main offender in regard to the violation of the German ideal. Not once, however, the communists been mentioned until today, regardless of the fact that people of such political creed were also to be punished. She had to get out. In front of her, a head with parted blonde hair and pigtails sat absolutely still on its shoulders. Staring into it, Lysel revisited those dark rooms of her past, and her mother answering questions made up of one word. She saw it so clearly, her starving mother, her missing father, communist, her dead brother, and now we say goodbye to this rubbish, this poison, and just before Lysel Merming had pivoted with the nausea to exit the crowd, the shiny brown-shirted creature walked from the podium. He received a torch from the accomplice and lit the mound that dwarfed him in all its culpability. Heil Hitler. The audience. Heil Hitler. A collection of men walked from the platform and surrounded the heap, igniting it, much to the approval of everyone. Voices climbed over shoulders, and the smell of pure German sweat struggled at first and poured out. It roared corner after corner. Still they were swimming in it. The words, the sweat, and smiling. Let's not forget the smiling. Many jocular comments followed, as did other onslaughts of Heil Hitler. You know, it actually makes me wonder if anyone ever lost an eye or injured a hand or wrist with all of that going on. You'd only need to be facing the wrong way at the wrong time, or stand marginally too close to another person. Perhaps people did get injured. Personally, I can only tell you that no one died from it, or at least not physically. They were dying on the inside. There was, of course, the matter of 40 million people I picked up by the time the whole thing was finished. But that's getting all metaphoric. Allow me to return us to the fire. The orange flames waved at the crowd as paper and print dissolved inside them. Burning words were torn from their sentences. On the other side, beyond the blurry heat, it was possible to see the brown shirts and swastikas joining hands. You didn't see the people, only uniforms and signs. Birds above did that. They circled, somehow attracted to the glow. Until they came too close to the heat, or was it the humans? Certainly the heat was nothing. In her attempt to escape, a voice found her. Lysel! It made its way through, and she recognized it. It was not Rudy, but she knew that voice. She twisted free and followed, to find the face attached to it. Oh no! Ludwig. He did not, as she had expected, sneer or joke, or make any conversation at all. All he was able to do was pull her towards him and motion to his ankle. It had been crushed amongst the excitement. It had been bleeding dark and ominous through her sock. His face wore a helpless expression beneath his tangled blonde hair. An animal, not a deer in the headlights. Nothing so typical or specific. It was just an animal. Hurt amongst the melee of his own kind, soon to be trampled by it, somehow she helped him and dragged him towards the back. Fresh air. They staggered to the steps to the side of the church. There was some room there, and they rested, both relieved. Breath collapsed from the Shikmel's mouth. You slipped down over his throat. He managed to speak. Sitting, he held his ankle and found Lyselle's face. Thanks, he said. Her voice said, her mouth rather than her eyes. More slaps of breath, and they watched images of schoolyard antics and schoolyard meetings. I'm sorry for, Lyselle heard it again. Communist. She chose to, however, focus on Ludwig. Me too. They concentrated on breathing then, and there was nothing more to say or do. Their business had come to an end. The blood enlarged on Ludwig's ankle. A single word leaned against the girl. To the left of flames, and the burning books were cheered like heroes. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there because my throat is very sore. And I think it's time for dinner where I am, at least. Yeah, for however long you were here, it was nice reading for you. And I'm glad that you took time out of your day to listen to me. I might see you around in another stream, but for now, goodbye.